look, not the greatest, and no surprises, as you can imagine, of course, with the amount of people that have turned up to see the Pope, to watch for the smoke. You would expect that it would be difficult to get some connectivity, but we continue. Of course, we are still in studio with Father Lawrence Mduduzi Ndlovu. What a moment! And before I walked in, such an incredible question that was asked by Xoli about whether or not we're seeing here a liberal, a Pope, or a conservative Pope. And I was looking, you know, to see the translations of what it is that he had to say in the beginnings of that speech. And one of the quotes he mentions is, one of the quotes that I found was, "Together we must try to find out how to be a church that builds bridges, establishes dialogue, and is open to receiving everybody." Does that give us a sign?
I think it does. If you look at his ministry, the entire spectrum of his ministry, born in North America, but also working in Latin America, being a religious Augustinian, then working in the Roman Curia, in the Vatican. You see the entire spectrum of a man. It's very difficult to say what he is, but if we use the words that he's just said, the posture more or less continues. The posture of dialogue, the posture of openness, and so on. But also, he seems to me, certainly if you read his biography, as we've all been scrabbling around to find whatever we can find, the cardinals have chosen a safe hand. They seem to be actively trying not to make a statement, to say, you know, we're rescuing the papacy from from what was Francis, or we're continuing. He's very much a man who has an illustrious history of leadership in all the spheres of the church, down to the very basic parish level where all of us are sort of working every single day, to running a diocese, to running an Augustinian order that he was part of and he was in the leadership of, to becoming a bishop, to becoming a cardinal only recently in 2023. So the trajectory, and I wouldn't be surprised that him and Pope Francis had met in their time in Latin America, which is why I think he recalled him, which is why I think he knew him and was able to make him cardinal in 2023. So it's very early days to tell, but from what we can see, he's a man who has worked within the confines of the church. He was head of the dicastery for the Congregation for Bishops and Latin America. That means he has had the task of appointing bishops, you know, in the previous pontificate and so on. So he's a trusted hand and might be possibly even a more discerning person, not to say Pope Francis wasn't, but the job of choosing bishops is ongoing across the world and assisting the Pope to make those appointments and so on.
Yeah. We're going to bring in other speakers, of course, as we continue to get reaction to really us being able to see the big reveal there from Vatican City of the new Pope. We are also joined by Bishop Neil Frank, who's the Bishop of Marion Hill Diocese and Chairperson of the SACBC, the Catholic Institute of Higher Education. We also are joined by Father Mundakane Mahlago. Thank you so much for joining us. What a moment, Bishop Frank. I'll let you go first. I mean, just the moments that really are top of mind for you, from the moment that we saw that white smoke, the anticipation then to see the Pope step out onto the balcony, and then once his identity was revealed, your initial reactions.
Oh, one of great excitement. Thank you for having me. Certainly great excitement, you know, filled with joy that the process has come to an end with the conclave, that we now have a Pope. I'm very happy with the choice they've made. I don't know the person personally, but I know that he's a down-to-earth person, as one of our bishops have testified. And very intrigued and excited about the name that he had chosen, as well as his first words of peace. And I see continuity with Francis, and as well complementing Francis in one way. I think there's a bit of a social dimension to the choice that he will bring to the papacy. By choosing the name of Leo the 14th, he's obviously connecting to the thought and the idea of Leo the 13th. And Leo the 13th was very important for for the foundation of Catholic social teaching. And I think this is what complements what Pope Francis had brought to the world. Pope Francis, I think, had focused on the individual that had been marginalized and brought them into the church. But we also need to look at our social, political, economic systems that keep people oppressed, that reduce the dignity of people. And I can see this is what's the complementary side that our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, is bringing. He continues the tradition of Pope Francis. He talks about synodality. He talks about listening to each other. He's talking about peace. And, there are so many wars happening in our world right now, wars in Africa as well. He's preaching the message of sitting down and talking with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's just magnificent.
And we're going to go through his speech in a moment. Of course, we all watched on much of it in Latin, but obviously we may not have gotten all of it. And so I will be sharing with our viewers really the core message coming out of that speech. But Father Mahlako, your reaction? We have an American Pope, the first ever. What do you make of that?
Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you for having me. Well, this is a beautiful reality which we see the diversity of what the church actually is all about. And when you see the surprises like this that comes unexpected, it gives you a way of seeing how we actually have in it, the church trusting itself and seeing the direction with which the Holy Spirit can easily find the meaning of detecting where and how, who can be the rightful one. And this is actually brings a joyous moment to all of us, to all the Catholic community. We are actually embracing exactly what is happening. And we know that as we embrace it, we continue to embrace what the Holy Spirit continues to do.
Yeah, of course, there was the question in the run-up to this even just the electing and conclave in and of itself, Bishop Frank, around whether or not we would see a pope come from a superpower. And indeed we have. I mean, is that something to consider as a concern or as something that is a green shoot? What do you make of that?
No, I don't think this is a problem that he comes from the United States. A pope is the pope for the church, and it doesn't matter where he comes from. He begins to think more globally. Although he grew up in the United States, he spent a lot of his working life in South America and Peru. And this would have formed him in an important way in his own theology and his ministry. So I don't think that's a major problem for us. I think he has a certain simplicity that comes from also his own formation in the Augustinian order. And that creates a man who's complete in many ways. Yeah. So I don't see any problem there.
I mean, that's going to be, I think, the hot potato discussion, isn't it? Right? The politics of it, and an important but difficult conversation. Of course, our viewers also wanting to share their thoughts, and so we are taking calls on 010-594-6010 or send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. Jan is in Hammanskraal. Jan, good evening. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, how are you, ma'am?
I'm well, sir. Talk to us. What do you make of our new Pope?
Well, I will consider the election of a new Pope as a political interference because there was an outcall by U.S. President Donald Trump on the election of a Pope. So it's really irritating to see that now politics are involved in church matter. We have, as Africans, we have also raised the issue of having a black pope. We have never had a black pope in the history of Italian popes. It's really irritating. I think the Catholic, they need to look at in a certain eye on how can Africa, we've got religious people who are believing women and religion, but we've never had a black pope, but we've got Catholics in Africa, Malawi, everywhere in other countries. We must also consider having a black pope in the near future.
Okay. Jan, thank you so much for calling. Interesting insights, and we'll take more of those calls. Father Ndlovu, I'll bring that one to you. Because you hear Jan saying that, you know, he feels that this is political interference. That's the position of our caller. Of course, you do have, just days before conclave, you did have U.S. President, of course, now coming out and denying that he had tweeted that image of himself clad in papal attire. Can we separate the politics? And what do you make of that? When you have somebody who says, all right, we can have the discussion around African and black popes on one end, and we know that historically we have had African popes, and perhaps you can educate us on that, which I think is important. But the politics, is this an apolitical process?
I think that the caller, firstly, thank you so much for explaining that, you know, in the early life of the church, certainly there were about 3 African popes before. But that's what happens when the church is this old. When we're over 2,000 years old, people in the contemporary era really look at life as they know it currently. I don't also think it is correct that this is the politicization, that this election is a politicization in any way, because you have to look at the man and the contribution that he has made and where he has worked and why there appears to be a relationality to him because of the work that he has done in what would be the global south, the Latin Americas, what would be considered the new world, the bulk of his life. And also the life of the church in general. He doesn't have an illustrious working career in the United States. He's not one of the current cardinals who are coming from the major cities of the United States, New York and so on. Born in Chicago, certainly. And I think what Bishop Frank was speaking about is also important. He chooses, you know, Pope Leo XIV. If you look at Pope Leo XIII, he had been the writer of the phenomenal encyclical Rerum Novarum, which spoke about the dignity of labor, of work. It was the founding documents of the trade unions in the world. So the social justice elements that were important to Pope Francis and that are important in the social teachings of the church are certainly once again coming to the fore. And even if the fact that he comes from America, as I said earlier on, might also work to our advantage, because we do need some kind of unitive way into what seems to be a very divisive period in the world. And that's part of what the papacy is meant to do in the unification of persons. So I think the caller perhaps might feel very strongly that this is a politicization, but the cardinals that are present currently in the conclave are not majority American. You know, we had Africans, we had Asians, we had Europeans, Latin Americans, and of course American cardinals from all over the world. So that influence that perhaps the caller is suggesting might find that it is slightly weak. It's a very weak argument because it takes a lot to influence every cardinal from all over the world.
Yeah. And just to remind our viewers of the mathematics here, 133 electing cardinals. Of those 133, just 10 were from the USA. And so you would have had those 10 needing to work incredibly hard if the motivation is political and coming from, you know, I suppose a nation intended sort of motivation. But Father Mahlako, what you make of the political moment as is brought up, because it certainly is something that I don't think a lot of people are going to be ignoring. It's going to be a question. But Father Ndlovu talks about the role that this Pope has to play then in that unification, and how he would then go about doing that.
Through that, I think, like we are, Ndlovu has made it clear to say, as this is an era where I think the papacy comes in the right time to actually respond to the current issues, the divisive realities that we are currently experiencing. This time and pointing moment that we are in, this is the moment where we will see this unification coming through this Pope who actually chooses even way the same reality that you hear all of them mentioning about the lay, whom he comes clear to say we might even be a unifier more than anything to answer and respond to the divisive realities. But at the same time, I do not see any infiltration, like Father actually hinted earlier, of political actual influence in any way. Like we are seeing it as the role of the Spirit and the way God actually sees his way. Let's not forget that as much as we can argue about it in a way that we do actually interrogate it, it is still a spiritual reality that we are actually listening to. And I guess all the cardinals, they are guided by the same Spirit. Like you rightly pointed it out, that 10 of them, they wouldn't be an influence to other 123. But then it happened that this is the reality which they count and see the potential of the man more than what the other people may analyze. Of course, the callers and other people who are actually are always saying their opinions, and their opinions are respected. And as we respect their opinions, at the same time, we are aware to the fact that this is the reality that we are to face, that God works things in his way. Even then, as we look at it, he wants to respond to other realities that he sees that the world needs at the present moment. Yeah. That's what I think, and my take is that, yeah.
Yeah, of course, we've got some congratulatory messages coming in as well, one of them being from the ANC's first Deputy Secretary General, Nomvula Mokonyane, having called in this evening. Thank you so much for calling in. Talk to or being part of this discussion. Talk to us about this moment and certainly the message that you'd like to share.
Thank you very much, and good evening to your panel, and good evening to Father Ndlovu. I'm very elated that the Catholic Church, my church, now has a Pope. And the name Pope Leo XIV, looking at who Pope Leo XIII was and what he believed in, we do indeed are looking forward to building bridges within the church, within different nations, as well as within the different faiths that are also trying to unite the world. What is of importance also is that for the first time there's been such a huge interest about the process. And for us, African does not mean progressive, but what is important is about the representative of the church. We need to also go out as the Catholic community to continuously expose those who have now developed interest on the processes in the church, including those in the church who had many assumptions, that here you now have the representative of St. Peter, who must all unite and ensure that he becomes the representative of the church and build those bridges across racial lines, across class, across different genders, and most importantly, for peace in the world. I'm very happy to have the first North American Pope in the history of the church.
Well, we do appreciate your input. Thank you so much for speaking to us, of course, Nomvula Mokonyane there of the African National Congress. We check in with Linda Mnisi, of course, as he keeps a close eye for things for us from Vatican City. So he was there and he can explain to us just exactly what it felt like. Number one, when that white smoke was seen from the chimney above the Sistine Chapel. And Linda, the moment that you were able to see who we now refer to as Pope Leo XIV.
Well, Naledi, from that moment when the smoke came, the white smoke, in fact, came out of the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, the mood here on the ground has been electric from that point on. I mean, if you just look around, people are starting to go home, but I mean, it is a very big day, and a lot of them that we've spoken to have been essentially sharing what they think about the new Pope. As you can see there, some American yes.
All right. Connectivity issues there with Linda, but we're going to keep dipping in because he really is there and living the moment, and so we're all living vicariously through him, certainly at this time. This is a tweet that came out just moments after we saw, of course, the white smoke. This tweet coming from the U.S. President Donald Trump. Congratulations to Cardinal Robert Prevost, who was just named Pope. It is such an honor to realize that he is the first American Pope. What excitement and what a great honor for our country. I look forward to meeting Pope Leo XIV. It will be a very meaningful moment, and I can tell you this: the world will be watching for that moment to see what kind of discussion takes place. But let's zoom a little bit more into the man, and I'm interested in the education. Of course, we've been referring to Pope Leo XIII and his legacy. Bishop Frank, perhaps you can assist us. I look back at Pope Leo I, actually, and I see that he was one of the first to be, given the title the Great, which I think is incredibly important. The choice of that name, and certainly the message in and of itself that sends to the 1.4 billion members. Bishop Frank.
Yes, thank you. I think the name is carrying a big tradition of being an academic, of addressing the big issues in the world. And I think Pope Leo XIV sees himself in that tradition. I don't know all the Pope Leos, I must say, but certainly Pope Leo XIII had opened up a new dimension for Catholic teaching, and that social dimension, which is extremely important. And I think we need that more and more in today's world, because we see so much of discrimination in different places. There's inequality. We can see that in our own country. And we need this message that goes down to the ordinary person. Although Rerum Novarum talked about the working class, in South Africa we have to speak about the non-working class, because that's the biggest. And that's the social teaching. That's what the church needs to bring. And systems that keep people unemployed, that keep people poor. We see that in our own country, and we need that message, I think, for ourselves. I'd like to comment also on the political aspects that have been raised just now.
Sure.
And I think for us in South Africa, those who were formed during the mass democratic movement of the 70s, the 80s, may have developed a prejudice against the United States, knowing how they were involved in the training of the SANDF at that time. But in the last 2 months or 3 months, we certainly intensified our prejudices, because for obvious reasons of what has happened and is in our news all the time. It's unfair to project those prejudices onto Cardinal Prevost, Pope Leo XIV. He's independent of that. And the choice in the church is independent of skin color or nationality,
Yeah.
And I think just the smile on his face and his message is a universal message of peace.
Yeah, that's going to be important. Let's check in once again. Thank you so much for that, Bishop. We're going to continue with our panel, and we're taking calls, but we also have Linda Mnisi live for us in Vatican City. Hopefully that line going to hold out to Linda and explain to us what you were seeing, describe the atmosphere and what you're hearing from those that have gathered at St. Peter's Square. Excitement, what are the issues that you're hearing there on the ground?
There's a lot of excitement, Naledi, here on the ground because, of course, the new leader of the Roman Catholic Church has officially been appointed and introduced to the congregants. The 1.4 billion members of this church have gotten to see, from wherever they are in the world, have gotten to see the new leader. And it is, of course, something that they continue to celebrate here at the St. Peter Square. Some Americans were just here on tour. And then, of course, the big moment, the big announcement, and a lot of them saying, well, we're not Catholics and we're learning about this as we go. So it's quite an important moment for them, Naledi. But I'll bring in now Father Magabo, who'll talk to us about, this moment. We've been watching this moment together. And when he emerged, you called it from when it would happen. You called me earlier saying it's going to happen, Linda. Wait for it, it's going to happen, and it happened. But also, we was talking about how somebody who's really not that popular, especially amongst the names that were flying around, would emerge. And exactly that's what happened.
Well, firstly, I'm very happy that Newzroom Afrika stayed until the finals, and we've seen the finals with you. Right, definitely. He was not among the names that were going around as the leading names. He's a person who kept a very low profile himself. He worked, basically, most of his time he worked in Peru, in South America. And so it was there when he was appointed a bishop, and he was appointed to be the prefect of the dicastery for the bishops. And he was only appointed a cardinal in 2023, very recently. And so, yes, he definitely was not among the leading names. So, which might be one of those reminders that no matter what we think, who's going to be the Pope, the decision definitely is not made by the noises outside. It will always be them inside who come to that decision with their voting.
Let's talk about the work that he's done. I mean, I managed to grab a couple of Americans around here who, one of them in fact said to me, it's great because he's a fierce critique of Donald Trump. Others are saying, well, we'll help him build a bigger tent for the church. We'll help him build those bridges, but within the church. Talk to us about his work.
Well, look, you are not going to be able to separate, obviously, his work within the church and outside the church, because one of the things people need to remember is that as we are members of the church, we are Catholics, we are also members of a civil society. And so within the church, I do not think that he's going to have a lot of problems if he tries to bring about unity, in the sense that, as I said before, this is what his brothers would have asked each and every one of them, to try and seek unity within the church. In as far as what they said about Donald Trump and all that, we shall wait and see.
You were talking earlier about his work in Peru. You know, he's known for his work in Peru, and will be able to engage different nations because he seems to be fluent in Spanish, Latin, and a number of other languages.
Well, the advantage of having a person like him who worked on the ground is that he understands the situation very well, the difficulties, challenges, and all the joys of the people on the ground. So he is a person who is actually, I would say, quality-wise, is well balanced in the sense that he worked with the people in parishes, he worked with people in the diocese, he then moved into work in the offices here in the Vatican, and so he is also a canon lawyer, so he understands very well the law of the church. And so that always works in his advantage. And him being multilingual only makes it easy for him as a pontiff, the Roman pontiff. When he goes around in different countries, he will be able to communicate easily with almost everybody where he goes.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about what building bridges looks like. Firstly, the church was reflecting on the divisions within the church, but also he comes from a country, that at the moment is led by a controversial figure. What do you think, building those bridges look like realistically?
Well, obviously, the socio-political situation is not something he's going to avoid. He will try to give it a different approach as the leader of the Catholic Church, to say, let's find, as he has said himself when he was speaking here, we need to look to dialogue. So let's find common ground. We dialogue and find common ground, so that we are able to move forward together. So going forward as a people who are divided, it doesn't help, not only in the church, but in the world around.
They were talking a couple of days ago, the church that is, and even yesterday during the Mass of praying for the election of a new Pope, about the characteristics, and I know you and I touched on this quite extensively, of a Pope. Do you think he fits that box?
Well, as we have said earlier, he's a person who kept a low profile. Most of us as Catholics now, as we live here, we're going to be sitting in front of our screens, trying to understand him better than the things that we know now. So we will be researching him thoroughly to understand him, to know basically his profile, to know what he did in the past, what he said in the past. Are we on safe ground or not on safe ground? So also the fact that he is 69 years old, if he's going to be a good shepherd, we're going to be happy for a long time. But if he's not going to be a good shepherd, we might be stuck with him for a long time.
And, you know, it's quite interesting because the issue of the age is something that, you know, some of the people that were reflecting on, you know, his appointment were talking about, that it's impressive that he is relatively young.
Yes, he is relatively young compared to the popes that we had before. Most of them would have been, I mean, in the recent past, would have been in their late 70s or in their 80s. Yeah. At least his two predecessors were like that. I mean, John Paul II was appointed when he was about 58, so he stayed around for a long time.
Yeah. And of course, there will be one aspect that post what we saw today, there'll probably be an inauguration, a mass to inaugurate the new Pope.
Yes, we are all looking forward to that. He is mass as the Pope in public here at St. Peter's Square. So they will announce the day when he will be celebrating that mass. We are all hoping that we will be taking part at that mass.
All right, thank you very much. That's Father Phuthi Magabo there, who's been watching Naledi with us very closely, these proceedings as they unfold, and in fact talking really about, you know, everything that has been happening from the moment, you know, they entered into the Sistine Chapel right till the last moment, and his predictions, I must admit, he was quite spot on, because he sent me a message earlier on saying, well, any moment now you can expect the white smoke. And of course, because of, you know, we're skeptics, well, I wanted to know, are you sure? You know, but obviously, you know, one of the things that was historic, in fact, I want to bring you back in. One of the things that was quite historic, Father Magabo, is the issue around the ballot. Francis was elected after 5 ballots, but he seems to have been elected after 4 ballots. Does it mean that the church is now finally getting a hold of and understands the system of voting for a pontiff?
It may be yes and no at the same time. I mean, Pope Benedict XVI was also voted with only 4 ballots. So it's not the first time that is happening. We may not know in the other elections for the Pope how long they took, but definitely at the beginning of the process, they would have taken much longer than they're doing now. So over the years, they've refined the system to understand it better. So I would agree with you on that one.
But what does it tell us about the cardinals and where their minds were? I mean, you spoke earlier on about, you know, narrowing down the names. You know, instead of voting for somebody who's not getting any votes, you know, they would know essentially what now is happening and would be able to vote according to the front runners.
Well, what this would say, if it's a quick, like it's something positive. It means that there is a lot of unity among them. I mean, if they had to take much longer, it would also say that they do not agree. So if it's quicker, it means that they agree about the person that they need to vote for. So the shorter, the better.
All right. I want to try, Naledi, to move, but I'm very scared of our connection that it might disconnect, because very close to where we are standing, there are a couple of Americans who obviously are taking interviews at this moment. Many of them will be able to speak about what their reaction is. I mean, there was a group of Americans that were chanting "America, America" earlier on, that were leaving the St. Peter's Square. Seemingly, this is a moment of pride, a moment of joy, because they actually get to really live in the moment and, of course, be amongst those who are, you know, celebrating at this very moment. So we're going to try to get some word from some of the Americans. Yeah, sorry, I'm live. Just a moment. Okay, let's move it. Okay, I'm going to try you again. Yeah, let's talk about your reaction how are you feeling at the moment? I mean, it's a big moment for America, the first American Pope, but also somebody that's seen to be able, like he said, be able to build bridges.
I'm shocked. I still haven't really processed that an American will be here at the Vatican who's going to be the Supreme Pontiff of over 1.5 billion Catholics worldwide. It's hard to imagine. You know, when my friends and I booked our tickets a week ago just to come for conclave, we couldn't have even pictured this. We thought it'd be an Italian or perhaps Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines. It's very special. It's very special to me as a Catholic, as an American, to be here in St. Peter's Square, to watch an American walk out on that balcony. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. A lot of people are saying that, you know, they didn't expect, like you're saying, they didn't expect him to come. He kept a very low profile. But do you think perhaps in America, particularly in Chicago, where he comes from, he was known?
Yes, I believe he was really well liked in Chicago. You know, I'm really interested to see how the American bishops, the Conference of American Bishops, are going to really react to this election. I hope that everyone has a great reaction. I'm sure they will. But, you know, in the past, with some of Pope Francis's more liberal, if you will, or progressive policies, the American bishops were a bit hesitant to go forward. So time will tell on how this papacy goes, and I really wish him well.
Yeah. One of the people that I spoke to from America, in fact, says he's quite happy because he's one of the biggest critiques of Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know, I think there are many big critiques of Donald Trump all over the country. And I think that as long as our Pope is spreading the compassion that Jesus showed, I think that we'll be in good hands.
Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So Jonathan is from America, Naledi, talking to us about how they're feeling at this moment, because obviously, as you can imagine, we're all trying to grab the Americans. We're all trying to get a sense of what they think, you know, how they're feeling at this moment. And it may, of course, you may find that as colleagues in the media, we try to go for the very same people, really. And when you listen and you eavesdrop into the interviews, into the conversations that they're having, many of them are saying they're quite shocked. They didn't expect that, you know, an American cardinal would be appointed pope. So the mood here on the ground has been quite, you know, electrifying. People have been quite excited, some expressing a bit of disappointment, but there really was, you know, a hope that perhaps the Pope would come from Italy, because it's been quite a while since an Italian Pope was appointed. Let me just try to speak to someone. Thank you so much for your time. You've been here since day one.
From 25 April, every day, all day.
And you've been calling for peace.
I calling for peace. I stay with my sing hope for peace. With my lipstick, I draw hope for peace. I pray all day from 25 every day. I stay like stone for peace.
Yeah. What do you think about the new Pope?
I think it's the Pope for peace. For dialogue, he make the how he say the bridge, the dialogue between different nations. How we here in the Piazza San Pietro, for all words we speak different language, different culture, different religions come also here. But we live here all these days from conclave stay with peace. I'm from Ukraine. I pray for peace in Ukraine, but also in all world. I speak with somebody from Gaza, come to me, say, we want peace.
Yeah.
Somebody come to me from Moscow, Georg from Moscow, and say, we want peace.
Yeah.
So a lot of people for world say, we want peace.
Yeah.
So new Pope, it's a Pope leader, moral, spiritual leader for peace. I'm very happy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's try to get some word from some Americans. We're live from South Africa. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Talk to us about how you're feeling.
We're so excited. We're crying. It's just overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
You look pretty young, and I'm sure this was quite an experience for you.
Yes, this was, for most of my life, I can only remember Pope Francis. So this was the first time that I get to, remember a different Pope. I didn't remember Pope Benedict. So not only to see the election of a new Pope, but the first American Pope is so pretty.
Let's talk about what you're hoping for. I mean, a lot of people are already praising him for his speech, talking about building bridges, which is important because it speaks to, responding to the current challenges of the world. What are your expectations?
I expect he'll probably carry the same message as Pope Francis did, which is calling for peace, not only for people that are in war, but for peace amongst the world, which is, one of the things that not only, Pope Leo XIV or Francis, but a lot of popes have argued for the last, couple years.
And are you Catholic?
We are.
Talk to me about, Catholics, particularly in Chicago, if you know.
Well, we're from Philadelphia, so we don't know much. We've traveled to Chicago a couple times, but I could speak and say that Americans are thrilled. We're so happy to have the first American Pope, and we're praying that he comes back to the United States and visits us back there.
Yeah, I spoke to one American who was telling me about how this is perhaps a silver lining, at a very tumultuous time in America.
Yeah, that's true. But today, no matter what political party you're from or whatever you believe in the United States, today's a day for celebration because we have our first American Pope, and that is something to celebrate right there.
Thank you very much for your time.
Of course, thank you.
All right, Naledi, those are Americans. They're talking to us about, how they're feeling at this moment. So quite a lot is happening at this point. You would have seen lights going out because it has been really a long day, looking at where we started. And of course, the hopefuls, the people that came out in their numbers, they came from early in the morning, and you could almost see the space really getting filled when, the anticipation of the smoke, or the time for the smoke to come out as per the schedule of the conclave. People would gather here, people would clap, but also it's almost like an unspoken rule, really, where people would come here and there would be silence, Naledi. I've never seen so many people gather in one space and there being silence. In fact, my colleague and I were talking earlier on, saying if we were in South Africa, somebody would have probably started a song. But, we experience all those moments, and from the silence right to the moments of celebration, people screaming and shouting, as a sign of joy, really, that finally the Catholic Church has a leader. When the smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel, from the roof of the Sistine Chapel, releasing white smoke after a couple of disappointing rounds, 3 disappointing rounds, that was quite a sight to see. But obviously here on the ground, whether you're from America or from wherever, you're seeing young people celebrating, young Italian people singing and wishing the Pope well. So these are the sentiments really that are coming through here on the ground. Naledi?
Sure. Linda Mnisi speaking to us from St. Peter's Square and bringing us as close to the action as is possible. And we're able to get a sense of what that moment really feels like from just outside the Sistine Chapel, where tens of thousands of people gathered. Of course, we continue to get reaction with our panel here in studio and those who join us via video link. But Linda's been speaking to Americans. We want to hear from the South Africans. We're taking calls. Lenny is calling in from Lenasia. Lenny, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Good evening to you and good evening to your panel.
Thank you so much for calling. Your reaction and what you make of the new Pope?
My reaction is I'm a proud Catholic today to see that we have a new Pope. And I think we as Catholics need to support him in bringing peace into our world, especially in Africa, where we have so much of violence and so much of misunderstanding amongst ourselves. But someone that's going to lead us into that peace, I believe, is Pope Leo XIV.
Thank you so much for that, Lenny. We appreciate your call. We've got some WhatsApps as well. I think immediately when I hear Lenny's comment about Linda speaking to a lady there outside or on St. Peter's Square, who says she's been there since the 25th, holding that board that says Hope for Peace. So Jay sends a WhatsApp that says, Mina, I'm still not satisfied. After the 2,000 years been no African-born Pope. We are always the electors of other nations. This has shown that the Roman Church is not ready to be led by a black person, and more specifically from Africa. You cannot tell me that in 18 cardinals you can't find, that in 18 cardinals you can't find over 133 cardinals altogether, but and there have been, and we did say this earlier, there have been African popes. Anonymous says, after Trump's shenanigans, we are left with more questions than answers. Is it a coincidence? But we'll give the new pope the benefit of the doubt for now. Anonymous, appreciate that. Caitlin Majosi from Pinetown says, good evening. We're grateful to be celebrating this glorious moment. To think we're mourning our Holy Father. We were mourning our Holy Father just a week ago, but we're now rejoicing in the coming of our new Holy Father. What a massive blessing, a true reflection of who Pope Francis was. May his beautiful soul rest in peace. So well written. Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. And Kelvin says, this will only make the US president more arrogant. He already thinks he runs the world. Now imagine his thinking now. America is winning in his voice. I wasn't going to imitate the voice, Kelvin, but we do appreciate that. Another one that says, good evening, Naledi. I'm anonymous from Mamelodi. I'm delighted as a Catholic that we have a new Pope. Now the question is, can he fulfill what Pope Francis did? But I'm happy. Thank you so much for that WhatsApp. This is what I'm curious about now, Father Ndlovu. What is happening that we are not seeing right now? You know, there's been so much pomp and ceremony. Mm-hmm. What is the next? I know that we are expecting, of course, his first Mass. But what would some of those activities look like from your knowledge?
Well, we do know that all the sort of activities that we've seen, the busyness, will begin to sort of simmer down. And the inauguration Mass will take place, which is when he really now just consolidates all the activities that have happened. From then onwards, it's issues pertaining to the papal household. Hello, sir, this is your desk. Yeah. This is your office, this is your apartment, this is all those kinds of things. He then has to begin to think about what is he going to do with what remains on the desk that Francis left there. Mm. Tons and tons and tons of appointments of bishops, visitations, letters, appointments of head of departments, dicasteries. There's so many dicasteries in Rome. There's so many organizations that are papal-led within the church that need him to appoint, to make decisions, and so on. But then again, of course, going back to the work of the social justice and world peace and trying to do that mediatory role while running the church, but also having an eye for the interests of the world. There's an interesting thing I've been thinking about now, that he's Augustinian. St. Augustine was an African theologian, by the way, St. Augustine of Hippo, a huge influence in Catholic theology and Catholic thought. And so it would be interesting to see how that Augustinian and Thomistic theological thought, which is the foundation of really solid foundation of Catholic theology, of course, biblical in its nature, but of course, in theological thought and leadership, how that begins to come forward. If you look at his biography, he's a very scholarly man. He's a legal man. He studied canon law. He's done all the studies that are required, of course, for the ordination to the priesthood, philosophy, theology, canon law, and so on. He's done leadership at several levels. So we expect, I think, from him to hit the ground running. He's not a stranger to the machine, so to speak. And I think he would know, because he was one of the aides and closer to Pope Francis, he would know what are the urgent issues and what needs to be dealt with very quickly. And that's going to be interesting to watch. So there's these silent parts. And of course, the coat of arms that now has to be designed for him as he takes up this new seat, and all the duties that come with being a head of state, not just the leader of the Catholic Church, but also head of Vatican City State, and all that comes with all of those, what is now his vocation further to the primary vocation to the priesthood. It is still a vocation to the priesthood. He's now the pastor to the world. Thank God I still have, the sort of the Catholic Cathedral of Christ the King in Johannesburg and my congregation. That's enough. He's got to think about all of that and the needs of the world. It might be daunting for him, but I think he's had the allegiance of the cardinals before he came out of the balcony. They've all have pledged their allegiance to him, that they will support him, so he doesn't come, alone, as it were.
I think about that moment actually just before he stepped out on the balcony, and you're able to see some of the other cardinals, peeking through, and just such a magical moment. They're very broad and wide smiles. Father Mahlako, I'm keen to hear from you, because obviously what he then did is then he, uttered his first words as the 267th Pope. And his first words were, "Peace be with you all." And then he went on to say, these were the first words of the risen Christ. I mean, that's an incredible, powerful way to start your papacy. And then he goes on to say, and I want to read a little bit from, what we're able to pick up from the translations. He says, God loves everyone, and evil will not prevail. We are all in the hands of God. Now, you've got to think about the peace be with you. We are all in the hands of God. Father Ndlovu earlier talking about the role of unification. This is probably going to be one of the tougher sort of tenures that we might have seen for a while for a pope. When you think about the Middle East, when you think about Russia, Ukraine, the sort of voice that you think he needs to be able to use while being able to hit the middle mark of being a man of peace, but also being direct. I mean, it's a difficult balancing act for a man who leads the faithful.
Definitely, you're right. It is something which we see now. That the kind of the character that he is to present, it should be that of multitasking reality, of knowing what is to do and be tough, soft, lenient, and also like peace as he preaches. But most of all, like we are seeing the way it is presented, that as a man of social justice, he know what justice means, I guess. And I understand he might stand even firm in terms of what justice needs to be actually applied. I don't think he might actually compromise that as a man who knows what justice is all about. And at the same time, a man of peace as appropriate. Like he says clearly that he is saying something about the bridges that the men bringing together. And he will foster for peace in many ways. Yeah. Fostering for that peace also will encourage in a specific way, which I see the element of all beautiful theological realities that maybe many a times they might have been forgotten.
Yeah.
It is also interesting me a lot just to know and see, to watch and see what he will do with what Pope Francis he did away with when he entered in the Holy See, and seeing the realities or reinstating all those things, or is he going to continue with what he actually has begun before, and or continue with what Francis left as a legacy, or he will bring something new, which actually he will definitely show that he is actually a systematic man, as we see, as he trying to Leo the 13th, we see that he is systematic. He is actually practicing what the church says, and he works according to the book. Right. And if he works according to the book, then it means that there will be no stone which will be not unturned.
Yeah, lots for him to do indeed. Bishop Frank, I've got about a minute left, but I mean, in your view, what he should be doing as his first task to tackle?
As the first task, there are lots of problems of abuse in the church. And just a few days ago, the international headlines spoke about the sexual abuse of nuns. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed. You mentioned the wars, but you mentioned the ones that are in the media, that take a lot of space in the media. But there's ones very close to home, across our border in Mozambique, and DRC and Sudan. And there's 33 others happening in Africa we don't hear about. And I think this is where the peace needs to, that message of peace and reconciliation needs to penetrate. May I share just one bit of trivia?
Sure.
I just got a message that Pope Leo XIV, 20 years ago, had been in South Africa when he was the prior general of the Augustinian order. And he had visited at least Durban and the Augustinian sisters who were there and saw the work and the ministry that they are doing. So that's an interesting thing that he has been to our country. Yes.
Yeah, that is very, very interesting. Thank you so much for that, Bishop Frank. Certainly brings us closer to understanding and feeling understood as well by the new Pope Leo XIV. Thank you so much to Bishop Neil Frank, Bishop of Marion Hill Diocese, and as well as Father Mutakane Mahlako, Interdiocesan Youth Chaplain and National Chaplain, and Acts National Chaplain as well. Father Ndlovu, final thoughts. As a country, obviously, we're going to be debating the issue of the African Pope, I think, for a little bit of a while. And you've said we have had African popes, so that really isn't the biggest issue. But for South Africa, what we need to be really reflecting on as we see this new Pope and the message that this leadership, as has been elected, speaks to us.
I think it does. You know, sometimes as one might sound like you're making projections and things like that. But when we see transition issues, generally, we become very concerned. You know, whether be it in faith-based institutions, whether be it in political parties, wherever it is, wherever there's a transition of leadership, it's a performance and great angst and pain and that sort of thing. What we've been able to see here, the importance of setting up systems, and that the bark of the church as an institution is far greater than any of us. And there's a responsibility and a duty to safeguard these very important institutions like the church. And so we're very moved to see the seamless, you know, transition without great difficulties, as it were. But also the church in Africa, the Catholic Church has been working a lot in the area of development across the continent, in education, in healthcare, in hunger eradication, in peace building, and all of that. And I think that work has to be bolstered and supported and made even stronger. The use of the structures that are already there, but also the strength that we already have in the people that are sitting in the pews.
Right.
That also has to come to the fore, that kind of inclusivity and participation. So we were very excited, and we're looking forward to seeing what the new leader of the church has to bring.
And I think we can call it a new era, certainly, for
new,
the Catholic
correct.
Church.
Well, yes, new, indeed. Yeah.
Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to our guests. What a moment it was that we have observed, and really an honor to have you with us as we moved into the new era of the Roman Catholic Church. Father Mutakane Mahlako in studio with us, Father Lawrence Mduduzi Ndlovu, as well as Bishop Neil Frank speaking to us. We've got a few WhatsApps. Let's take a look at 3 that have come in from our viewers. Simpiwa says, "Evening, Aledi. I see no difference in his selection. He's from America, so that alone is part of politics in action. My viewers, African Roman pastors must now desist from voting as they vote for the European agenda." Simpiwa, thank you for sending in your thoughts. Chiki says, "Pope Leo XIV needs to come to South Africa and pray to end corruption and torture by the leaders of our communities." You're in luck because Bishop Frank saying that he's been here about 20 years ago. And another message that says, "The Bishop of the New Church of South Africa, I want to take this opportunity to say the finger of the Most High God has pointed to Robert Prevost as the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. May the good Lord walk with him to unite the church and the world at large." Congratulations. Thank you so much for that, Bishop of the New Church in South Africa. Actually, that's where I was baptized, believe it or not. And that is where we'll wrap up this hour. Thank you so much for staying with us. Newsfeed PM, the late edition, continues on the other side of this.